Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today, June 7th, approximately 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And there's a lot that is happening in California that is affecting the rest of the nation. It is an expression of a conflict that we are seeing in many parts of America and really needs to be addressed. Why is there violence on June 7th? Where did it come from? Who is involved? What is likely to happen in the future? These are important questions because we are seeing what is happening in California is happening in New York, Alabama, in Wisconsin, in Kansas, in Texas, across this nation. So in looking at what happens and why things are happening in California, we will understand what's going to be affecting all of us at some point in the near future. But before we get to discuss that, I want to take a moment to say, if this is the first time that you are seeing our channel, hello, we welcome you and thank you for being part of our audience. We want you to know that every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on all the social media that the internet overlords will allow to be able to hear your voice through your chats, your tweets, and even calling in from anywhere in the world to share your views and your thoughts about the issues affecting us all. And we hope you will do so because we believe the First Amendment is not just an American right, but a right of everyone in the world on all these issues that affect us. So we hope you will join us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to share your views. Let's look at what's happening with California. And there's a lot of news, but it's very confused. We are hearing things from the news media from a very specific point of view. We're seeing something very different from the public, and the source and the cause of this is being lost throughout the entire conversation. We're going to try and make some sense of this so that you have a better understanding of the whole situation. Now, let's start off with the fact that this is happening in California. The news is coming out of California, a very important state to keep in mind. California is losing population. In fact, according to ABC News, between April of 2020 and July of 2022, California dropped by more than 500,000 people. This is the first instance of population loss in 170 years. People are departing. It's very similar in New York State as well. People are running away from the progressive ideology and policies, and we're seeing this consistently. Of 58 counties in California, 46 decreased in their population. Now, the reason why we're seeing this is because there is also a very large increase in the number of foreign immigrants, both legal and illegal, in California. In fact, that number has tripled between 2021 and 2022. This is important to understand because the views and the ideologies of the individuals that are going into California is not the progressive ideology that already existed in California that people are running away from, that people are leaving to go to Texas and other states, Texas and Florida, predominantly. Now, what about the people there? It's important to understand. Looking at the population of Glendale, California specifically, according to the United States Census, we know there are 189,000 people that are estimated to be in Glendale in 2022. That is down from 196,000 people in April of 2020. We know that according to the census, 71% of the individuals identify as white, 1.8% identify as black. We have 13% that identify as Asian, and another 18.7% that identify as Hispanic. So these are important numbers to understand, but if we drill down, which is harder to find than you would imagine, approximately 44% of those in Glendale identify as Armenian, 1.2% German, 1.1% Italian, 1.1% American, which you would think would be significantly higher, and 1% Irish. That's the basic numbers, the basic breakdown. So a large part of Glendale, California has become not Americans, traditionally Americans who have been there for many generations, but a new influx of Armenian Americans who tend to be more conservative in their views, more religious and less progressive. That is important to understand, as it is part of the core of what we are seeing, especially as segments of California are transitioning from a very progressive ideology, what people tend to traditionally think of for LA or for San Francisco, and becoming something very, very different. Another element that's important to understand in this conversation is ANTIFA. Even as we see that today, according to WSFA News 12 in Alabama, there is an ongoing conversation to designate ANTIFA as a terrorist organization. This is from NBC News, the local affiliate. And so that's important to understand, because there's a conversation in the nation about not just progressive ideology, but those who are pushing that ideology the hardest, which Antifa is pretty much well known for. Now, Antifa is not strange to this channel. We've been talking about them for a long, long time. We have covered their actions, their riots, their attacks on the public in many states across this nation for multiple years. Even as we have seen over and over again that individuals like Representative Jerry Nadler of New York have denied that Antifa exists, as in the case of Portland in 2020, even as members of Antifa, an individual identified as a member of Antifa, murdered an American citizen in cold blood. It just doesn't make sense. So we see that Democrats and those who lean specifically towards a more progressive ideology ignore and try to confound or obfuscate the actions of Antifa, their militant progressive ideology wing. Now, this is important to understand because it also has an impact on what we have seen with Merrick Garland. Because Merrick Garland has for some time now been targeting parents at PTA meetings. This was an initiative started under the Biden-Harris administration. And we have seen that there was a school board memo that targeted parents at PTA meetings in their school boards, with parents being involved in the education of their children, which had a severe backlash, and the Biden-Harris administration directed the Merrick Garland to step in as the Attorney General and to investigate those parents that dared to speak up. And after more than a year of investigation, after more than a year and God knows how much money of the FBI going into various schools and targeting parents, we have seen that there was a grand total of 22 cases that were reported, that were received by the FBI, and of those 22 cases, none of them had a federal resolution. All of them were referred to state and local authorities to continue the investigation. This is not a national issue. Never was. Of course, Democrats like Democratic Representative Eric Swalwell have said that this is necessary because no parent has a right to threaten a school board volunteer. That no one gets to be involved in the education of children except those elected officials, not the parents of those children in those schools. Because these are tense issues. They are very serious issues. It has been alleged by many on the right that this has had a chilling effect on parents, that by using the FBI to investigate parents for finding out what is happening in their schools, well, parents have been effectively denied their First Amendment rights. They have been effectively cowed into submission. Now, Merrick Garland has says no, he does not agree with that, even though there have been documents that have been issued by members of the FBI that have been seeming to target parents, to add tags and identifiers by the FBI against individuals. Again, at the same time, this has resulted no impact. There has been no change. There has been no national event. This isn't epidemic across America. This isn't a national problem. It has effectively been a misuse of the power and funding of the United States into an issue that's truly just local. So we've identified so far in this conversation California and what is happening there, the exodus and who is coming in to replace it, the changing of ideologies and the clash of ideologies that are taking place on this issue, which involves parents, which involves education, which involves ANTIFA, a radical outreach of violent extremism. These are all important questions, but we have to ask, to understand what is happening in Glendale right now, why are the parents fighting? See, why was there this clash at the Glendale School Board? Well, there were over 200 protesters, there were 75 commentators, and there were dozens of police all present. Why was this the case? Now, I think it's very important to first identify that according to Clara Harder, in her well-cited article, the crowd stood in two physically and ideologically divided camps with a row of Glendale police officers between them. This is her second paragraph, the first sentence. At 5 p.m., a crowd of more than 200 gathered outside the Glendale School District. The crowd stood in two physically and ideologically divided camps. What does that mean? The article never goes on to explain what she means by two physically divided camps. How do you physically divide the camp? There were men and women in both camps, according to all video evidence of this. There were people who were Armenian on both sides of the political divide. There were people who were white, black. There were people who were presumably Democrats and Republicans on all sides. What are they talking about? What's the physical difference? And that's an important question, because it seems to be something is being suggested by this well-cited article from the LA Daily News, yet it's not explaining what is that division, what is that underlying bias that seems to be present. It's never addressed. I think that's critical to understand this. But going further in this article, because there is something that's very important. Where did this all come from? Why did this suddenly explode at this time? And the answer is, it's not because of what happened on June 2nd and protests in Satakoy Elementary School. No. This is because of what has been happening for more than a year in Glendale. In May of 2022, parents were outraged when public records request filed by a resident activist, Jordan Henry, revealed that in 2021, a third grade teacher showed students a video about gay pride and coming out. They were introducing sexuality and gender and identity politics to children, to third graders, children who are 9 years of age. It was so bad that the teacher was reassigned within the district and doesn't appear in the staff directory at Glendale. So they knew this was wrong, and so wrong that they took the teacher out of the school. Now, they moved the teacher to a different school where they may be doing the same thing, but Glendale parents were upset. Politics had no place in the teaching of children, especially 9-year-olds, where they would be impressionable and it would be considered indoctrination. Some Glendale parents were further angered on May 5th in a city council meeting when a mother and her special needs daughter claimed that her daughter, the special needs student, was taught inappropriate sexual acts in a sex education class, and further she was called a bigot for using incorrect gender pronouns. In addition to that, in this same May 5th City Council meeting, the daughter, a special needs student, said that male teachers were appearing in girls' locker rooms. Let's think about that. Now, the school said they investigated this and they found no evidence, but then again, we have seen school districts like in Loudoun County where they have declined to find any evidence that their internal investigations show no violations, and yet the reality turns out to be something very different. So maybe there was no credibility to this, but then again, maybe there is. Mind you, this is not being investigated by the FBI. Merrick Garland has not sent anyone to investigate this issue, as he shouldn't. It's a state and local issue. But notice the difference here. It even further in the article, in fact, the very last paragraph here, the district's policies allow students to select gender pronouns, which means students have to be taught what gender pronouns are, again, injecting sexual identity, progressive ideology into the classroom. You can't select your pronoun unless you know what a pronoun is, what these sexual pronouns apply to. You have to be taught that to then make a choice. Therefore, they are injecting it there, and students are allowed to use the restroom of the gender in which they identify with, something that we have seen as being a problem in Loudoun County and other counties around America. These are things that parents might well be upset with, that they may have some issues with, especially since we have seen that these policies have been abused in the past and have resulted in sexual assaults of young children, and that the school boards in these cases have allowed this to happen and in fact have continued that ability, that access to abuse in multiple schools. Again, I refer to Loudoun County among others, which we have covered in the past. Even though this is legal, and this is where some of the conflict is coming from. So again, we need to understand the background of what's happening in California, what's happening in Glendale in terms of the population and the ideology of the population, some of the key figures involved in this, ANTIFA, an organization that is known for its radicalism, known for its violence and its intimidation tactics, and what's happening in the city, both federally with the United States government, and how it has been aligned against parents, against individuals, parents, and communities in being involved in the teaching of their students because they have cause, because these schools have been introducing sex and gender politics to 9-year-old children, as well as possibly opening up those schools to inappropriate interactions between different genders, potentially leading to sexual abuses, as we have seen in other parts of the world. This is critical. These are critical factors that you're not hearing about in most of the coverage from the news media. So that's important to understand to get the full picture of what is happening here. Because with all of these factors, these long-term factors, that is the reason why we see that 3 people have been arrested outside of the Glendale School Board in violent clashes. That, as is being reported, that this isn't so much about Gay Pride Month as it is about a continuous policy to inject sex and gender ideology to children. And one of the reasons why parents were outside, 200 individuals were outside, many of them screaming, "Leave our kids alone," which flies in the face of individuals like Representative Adam Schiff, who is now seeking to run for the California Senate, the state representative position held by Dianne Feinstein, where he's saying that these continued acts of violence and hate towards LGBT community, especially towards students, parents, and teachers, are horrific. All of our children deserve to feel safe and be safe regardless of who they love and how they identify. But he's missing the point. The parents want, first of all, aren't really the ones that are being violent, as we see from more reporting. But what we are also seeing is that he is ignoring the serious concerns and potential for abuses that exist in the Glendale system, which he represents. He doesn't care that there are male teachers in the girls' locker room. He doesn't care that special needs students were called a bigot for not using gender pronouns that were being pushed by the school. He doesn't care that 9-year-olds are being introduced to sex and gender politics in 3rd grade. He doesn't care about that. That's not important to Representative Adam Schiff and the Democratic ideology. That seems to be very, well, you can't call it ignorant. He's well aware. He is blatantly disregarding and nullifying the importance of parents in the education of their own children. And he is raising up the school board and government above the rights of parents. That's a scary thing. Again, no one wants to talk about this in understanding what is actually happening in here. Now, what we do understand as we look at the reporting, whereas the LA Times is just saying that these were various individuals, or if we go back to the news from the LA Daily News, we see that this is two groups with physically and ideologically divided camps, whatever that's supposed to mean. But according to the LA Times, well, these were just clashes of individuals. Again, no identification of the political ideologies that were involved, the organizations that were involved in this, nor of the ethnicity of the individuals that were involved in this conversation. The fact that many Armenian Americans had a problem introducing sex and gender into the into school kids where it's inappropriate. But we do see that Antifa was directly involved. We know this not just because of the reporting, but as we will show in a moment, because of what was being sent out on Twitter. And so this is a battle that we see between the Southern California chapter of the extremist group Antifa that call for progressives to stand up to what they identify as hate groups. It is hateful, according to Antifa, according to progressive ideology, for parents to say that male teachers shouldn't be in girls' locker rooms. It is hateful, according to Antifa and the progressive ideology, to not teach children sexual politics, sexual and gender policy and identity politics, that's hateful to not impose that onto children. That's critical to understand. And what we have seen, as is being reported by many individuals, many of them blue checks, that we have seen individuals who are running for Congress who have misreported and inflamed some of the issues at Glendale by stating that there were stabbings when that did not exist, by trying to blame this on Proud Boys, even though we have seen that the individuals who have been arrested are members of Antifa, that they are initiating much of the violence that is happening there, and that these are Armenian Americans who are taking sides against the progressive ideology that they see in their community. For some reason, the news media does not want to discuss that, does not want to show that to parents. So we've given you a lot of the background and the evidence, and let's think about this for a second. Let's put this together so we understand. So for several years, we have seen an outpouring of progressives and many people in California, from California, where they have grown traditionally for many generations, into other states like Texas, like Florida, in a mass exodus, something we haven't seen for 170 years. They are being replaced in many of these communities by new Americans, first and second generation immigrants that have come into America, both legally and illegally, that tend to have more conservative views, that were not raised under the progressive ideology that historically has been in California. And they reject many of these policies, even though they are considered legal in California, that the parents do not support and do not match their views of life. And thus that has led to years of conflict in the school system, which is being supported by the government, Merrick Garland and others, who are saying that the school system, those elected officials, and the government are more important and have more power over what is being taught to children than the parents themselves, who want to remove any sexual identity, sexual and gender politics from there. Mind you, it's not just, even though this is being framed as LGBTQ, the reality is this is about not gender, this is about any sexual politics being taught to children. This is about the overall removal of political ideology in our school systems. And that's important to understand. We understand where it's happening. We understand who is involved. We understand the prioritization that is being used in moving these political agendas forward, and that they have been taking place for a long time. And we know, as we have seen on Twitter, that many of the left came to the community. They weren't members of the community. They came into this community to impose their will on those local parents. And the school board, at the end of the day, at the end of this entire discussion and these fighting, what happened? The school board ignored the parents and their rights and their views on how children should be raised, and supported adding politics into the school system because they approved the Gay Pride Month policies and ideology into the school system, which means this has not been resolved. This means that the pressure is continuing to build, that the sides are being even further divided, not by physicality, but by ideology. And we know that the news media is being very careful in trying to isolate the key factors. We see the mainstream news media overwhelmingly is not talking about the issues that led to what we saw, that they have not identified the various groups involved and their positions, their ideologies. They have not identified the impact of the government and its equity prioritization of government over the people. We have seen a lot. Given all of that, you may agree with the Antifa progressive ideology. You may think it's necessary to introduce sexual and gender and identity politics to 9-year-olds and those in 3rd grade. Maybe you think it's important for children to be sexualized at the very youngest of ages. That's fine. That's your ideology. But many communities across America don't agree with that, whether it's heterosexual or homosexual or trans or toasters or whatever it is that fits under the LGBTQAI++ toaster map, all of that. Many communities don't agree with that. And they have ideologies, they have traditions, they have religions that don't agree with that. And yet we are seeing that the news media is against them, that the government is against them. The Biden-Harris administration is pressing against them, which is increasing the pressure, is increasing the tensions, and very likely this won't be the last protest, this won't be the last battle. Even as we are fighting to have Antifa and violent organizations, radical organizations, deemed as domestic terrorism, which they routinely act in. We have long talked about the autonomous zones that are insurrectionist, that violate every local, state, and federal law, which work in conjunction with Antifa, as we have seen with the defenders of the Atlanta forest, as we have seen in the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, otherwise known as the Chaz. We have seen it in Atlanta. We have seen it in Boulder, Austin, Portland, Seattle, New York City. We have seen this across this nation. and it isn't being addressed, and it's getting worse. Autonomous zones exist at this moment across America, including in Berkeley in California. We know that this has led every single time to violence, and more often than not, to acts of to individuals being murdered. And we are seeing that this is being taught into our children at younger and younger ages, when they are more and more susceptible and to being indoctrinated. And that is a problem both for parents and communities and governments. So you may align with the left on this. You may feel like this should be a good idea. But the reality, it seems, is it really isn't. It isn't making people more inclusive, it's making people more divided. It is creating more fractures on the local level as well as the state, on the state and federal level, than any inclusion that is supposed to be happening. We need to look at this very carefully, and we need to understand this. The problem isn't that there was a fight in Glendale. That really isn't the issue. The issue is that Antifa and far-left radical activists are continuing to pressure parents and indoctrinate students under the allowance of law, subverting the core principles of America. That is far more important, I think. But maybe you think I am wrong. Maybe you believe, in looking at all the evidence, looking at all the factors, that this is simply a left versus right issue. Maybe you believe that standing up for the LGBTQ is more important than parents' rights, the protection of children. Maybe you think it's more important than the division of America and the consequences that come from that. I don't. You might. I look forward to seeing your comments to tell us what you think, and we hope that you will join us this Sunday and every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to share your thoughts about this and other factors going on around the world. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today. Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States, admitted he has not read the Arizona immigration law. Let's think about that for a moment. I know it is a difficult task to stand up in front of our peers and say that Congress has failed to listen to voters.
You here at CPAC said yes to President Donald Trump in 2016, and I know you're going to say yes to Paul. She was very aware that she had the flag in her hands and that the flag was dragging on the ground. That is a intentional action. She knows what she is doing. She then drops the flag. Understand the logic, and we see this in social media on a regular basis, and it's something that Newsweek decided not to tell you about.
I held the AR-15 in my hand. I wish I had it. It is as heavy as 10 boxes that you might be moving. And the bullet that is utilized, a 50 caliber, these kinds of bullets, need to be licensed and do not need to be on the street.
That's right. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, a representative in Congress who is writing laws to deny American citizens their rights, has no idea what she's talking about. And they are against the vaccine mandate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you support that?
We shouldn't have any problem in meeting that error rate, because last time I checked, there were not a lot of planes crashing into each other at airports, right? You can meet a very, very stringent accuracy rate when it's important, when it matters, like in federal elections.
No one wants to point out the quote from Joe Biden where he is admitting that he is willing to lie to the American people.